Hello, and welcome to another of my series of conversations. My name is John Cornicello, and I'm going live on Mondays and Thursdays at 10 Pacific and 1 Eastern. On Monday, my guest will be one of our regular attendees here, Ian Citrin. For those who don't know him, Ian is best known for his bodybuilding and fitness photography, and he's also an aviator and hangs out with the planes at the Palm Springs Air Museum. Really looking forward to this conversation, which we've kind of already started this morning. But today, my guest is Drew Hendrix, the president of Red River Paper. So I hope you have your questions about inkjet papers ready. Let me introduce to you Drew Hendrix.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Drew's over in Dallas and didn't get hit by the tornado, by the hurricanes.
No, we've been we got lucky. It moved off to the east enough that no rains would be coming this way. But it's nice and cool though. So that's the only plus I think of the hurricane is it's slightly cooler now than normal.
Yeah. So can you give us a little history about Red River Paper?
Sure. So Red River was founded by my former boss, Dick Clampett. And he worked for his family's business, which is also in paper. It was founded in 1941, and he was a sales guy for them in the 70s and 80s and ran some different portions of the business. And he wanted to try something different, so he started Red River as an offshoot. And his initial thing was to make stationery, and that occurred right about the time that stationery stopped being important or really a thing. So he had to pivot and find something else. And he said one day this Japanese sales guy from a company called Japan Pulp and Paper walked in with a really lightweight glossy paper. And he said that the light just went off in his head that this was going to be the next thing. That was in 96, I think. So the inkjet printers back then were just, not anything to really think about. They were just sort of toys. But we started out with that, and from there we just grown into having products, from 32 different types of inkjet paper. We also sell some medical diagnostic imaging, which is sort of a side business now. Mm-hmm. And we grew from just being a company that brought in product that was ready to go to being what's called a paper converter, or just a converter. And that means we have equipment and expertise to take raw materials and turn them into something different. So
you buy rolls of paper from various mills?
That's correct. Yeah, we're buying what are called jumbo or mill rolls from mills or coaters that we do business with, and then do the finishing in Dallas, package it, store it in our warehouse, and then ship direct to the folks who use it. So it's for the most part, 97% of our business is direct to the end user. So we've got a big web presence, and that makes us a little bit different than most other brands. Most every other paper brand is retail channel oriented, mm-hmm. and we don't typically do that. So that's a short version of who we are and why we exist.
Great. Well, let people know that they can put questions into the chat if they have some, or they can open up and ask the questions. I'm going to start with a couple of things that for myself. How do you tell the printing side on some of the matte papers?
So like if you've got the ones that are the toughest are the bright white smooth papers that are usually made of trees. Mm-hmm. And if they are single-sided or C1S coated one side, there are three ways that you can tell. One of the least destructive way is to hold that paper up to at a steep angle, say about 45 to 55 degrees at a light, like any light would do. Mm-hmm. The side that's coated will be clearly smoother than the uncoated side. And it's more along the lines of, it looks like, kind of thinking of like a wall when you do what's called skip troweling along a wall. Mm-hmm. It has these very light indentations. And if you flip it to the uncoated side, it looks rougher. It'll have more of what looks like a 3D texture. That's because the coating has not covered up the surface. Mm-hmm. The second way is to lick your finger and touch both sides. Typically, if everything goes well, the side that's coated will have a little more sticky to it. And then the third way is destructive, and that is to use a highlighter. And a highlighted, if you're going to not use a section of the paper, mm-hmm. if you highlight it, the side that's brighter is coated.
Okay. So speaking of not using the section of a paper, my wife really loves the Canon Museum etching paper. And when you print with that, they enforce a super wide margin on it. And I was always wondering what the reason was for that.
Yeah, so we work with Canon. We're a media partner of theirs, and without talking out of turn, our impression is that what they call it a margin regulation is designed to prevent head strikes. And they are so concerned about head strikes that they went ahead and put in a margin regulation that cannot be overcome. So there's been people all over the world who've tried to hack the driver. And the people who are, I think, the best at it is some group in Europe and in Germany, and they couldn't get in and tear it apart. So that the margin is either 30 millimeters or 25 millimeters, and it corresponds with the thickness of the print head, or the depth of the print head. So they're trying desperately to make sure the print head has crossed the border of the paper before it starts laying ink down.
Okay.
Now, that was an issue, and it's what it would do in certain printers, like the Pro 10 is a good example. So if you put it on like a fine art setting, you are forced to have the margin regulation. You're also forced to only use certain sizes, and it uses the proper ink, matte black ink. Well, the fallback would normally be to set it to matte photo paper, and the margin regulations disappear. But the Canon Pro 10 is interesting because they use the wrong ink for the matte paper setting. They use the photo black ink. So you're in a corner with that particular machine, and the Pro 1 as well. So the 1000, the 300 that just came out, that's right in front of me here. And then the other machine, the newer machines have a way to get around that. There's a button you can click, and it says, "Are you sure?" And you say, "Yes, I'm sure." And then you can use the full sheet of paper with that setting.
So what is your paper that's closest to the museum etching?
Our product is Palladuro etching. So it's a 315 gram, 21 mil thick, 100% cotton, museum grade with the texture.
And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, Mike.
So for people doing that are coming from the film world and doing a lot of darkroom prints on a fiber paper, do you have some papers that kind of come close in appearance and feel to the fiber papers?
We do. We have two that come to mind immediately. The first is called Palladuro Baryta. And so just real quick, Palladuro is a moniker that we've given a line of products. And that's going to be the higher end or the highest end. So Palladuro Baryta is a true baryta or barium sulfate paper. It's made from tree fibers. It uses barium sulfate as the whitener. And we carried it for a little while back in the early 2010 reign, and there were some issues with it, so we stopped. And then had a customer call me, and actually the paper mill said, "You need to call Red River because they're the only ones that import it into the United States." And he said, "Well, I'm doing some printing, and the paper has to look like what Ansel Adams would have used." And okay, tell me more. And he said, "This is the only paper that we can find that looks a whole heck of a lot like Oriental Seagull." So that's kind of what got me interested in bringing it back. And they've sorted out the technical issues with the paper. So we're quite happy with it. It looks cool. It feels nice. For performance is quite good. And it is a dead ringer for 60-year-old, darkroom paper.
And what was the name again?
That's Palladuro Baryta.
Palladuro. Okay.
And then the second
Palo, P-A-L-O.
Yeah, so Palladuro is Spanish for hardwood, and there's a canyon, which is one of the largest canyons in North America, is in far west Texas. And so we were looking at a map one day and thought that would be cool. So that's why we call it Palladuro. And then the other paper is called Palladuro Soft Gloss Rag. And the rag indicates it's made of cotton, and soft gloss means it's got a little bit of a sheen to it. And it also looks like darkroom paper that would have been made of cotton and had some reflectivity, a little bit of texture too. So both those products are designed to mimic that look and feel, if that's what you're looking for.
Great. Let me just let someone into the room. Folks in the audience have some questions while I'm...
A quick question. Something just occurred to me. Is there a difference in papers as you're viewing a photograph as how it appears off center from viewing the photograph. I just happened to look at one on my wall, looked at it from about a 45-degree angle, and now looked at it dead on. And I see there's a big difference.
Are you talking about metamerism or something like that?
I'm not familiar with that term, but
Okay.
maybe Drew can help us.
Probably gloss differential is, and do you know what type of paper? Is it a satin, a gloss, luster?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Not a gloss. It's probably not a luster either. Actually, it's a Pirelli calendar.
Interesting. Oh, so it's offset printed. Well, so offset printing presents a little bit different, but I mean a different challenge. But what I would call it is usually gloss differential. So that just means that the ink, and it was more of a problem if you maybe say 10 years ago, and then Epson and Canon designed or built into their printers optimizers, which is a clear coat that floods the sheet. And now the new way of doing it is this Canon here, the Epson P700, which just came out, they no longer flood. They actually built the optimizer into an ink, one of the inks, so it fills in the gaps. And really all it is where ink is built up higher on the sheet than in other spots around it. So it just reflects light at a different rate. So that's why you see it looking like that. And metamerism is a little different. That's just the phenomenon where a print will look a different shade or change color slightly based on the temperature of the light hitting it.
Okay.
Will do different papers look different depending on what is over them? By example, museum quality plexi or museum quality glass? Does the different paper make it look different?
Typically no, not with museum. So if you're thinking about like water clear glass, that like the really high-end museum stuff, and I guess the acrylic comes close in terms of its clear, clearness. That's when you might see the extra sheen that might be on a luster or a gloss, as opposed to an etching, for example, that doesn't have any reflective qualities. And that's why it's funny because, always talking about, what's the best paper to use when you're framing or when you're not framing. And if you are using less than top quality acrylic or glazing, then the media type doesn't really matter a whole lot because it's going to introduce reflections as well. And we've even heard that some matte papers look better once they're put under acrylic or glazing. They just happen to, for some reason, there's something going on with the reflectivity. It looks darker and crisper. But if you're using really high-end materials, you should be cognizant that any reflectivity of the paper is going to be there. So if you walk around from side to side, you're going to see it looking differently as you go by. Take a matte paper and slap it under regular acrylic. It's going to look the same no matter kind of what direction you point at it. That makes sense.
This does, thank you.
Is there such a thing as a semi-matte paper? I'm looking for a way to print for clients in my printer here, and usually matte paper comes out a little bit too light. Obviously the blacks are subdued quite a bit, and a lot of my pictures are dark heavy. So I was wondering how to offer something different that is not, the typical luster or shiny surface that they would get anywhere else, but still be able to do it at home.
The term semi-matte was more used, I guess, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and before then, we carried a couple that were true semi-mattes. There was a matte paper that had maybe, I'm just using this as a reference, 20% reflectivity as opposed to 50% from a luster or 100% from a gloss. And they just sort of slowly disappeared off the market because they weren't really popular. And we carried a paper that Ilford's, this is the old Ilford in Switzerland, made a long time ago, and it was a dead ringer for the in surface. So darkroom or C process had an in surface, and it was exactly what you're talking about, but it all disappeared. So in our line, probably the closest thing that I could get for you would be that Paladura Barita that we were talking about. It's not glossy, it's not satin, but it's got reflectivity to it. So I'd almost have to just send you a couple of sheets and let you look at it. And by the way, everybody listening, we're happy to send free samples of a few papers to basically anybody who calls. We have sample kits which are designed for you to see everything in a logical order. But for example, Miguel, I think you were asking me a question about the semimap. If you just emailed me or called and said, hey, can I try a couple of sheets? We're going to say sure and mail it to you. Way better than buying a whole box and just figuring out, you may not like it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, from chat, I'm getting from Daniel, who doesn't have audio, so let's go. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. What advice do you have for someone who's just about to start printing small and medium-sized photos? What sort of equipment or what learning resources are there?
Okay. Look, I'll start with the last question first. And of course, this is because my knowledge base is what we put on our website. And it's a compendium of 2 decades of knowledge about how to get a good print, right? And what rules there are. And it extends not just to paper and ink, because that's not printing. Printing is the file, printing is the capture, printing is the edit, printing is the display. So we talk a lot about that on our info center or support section. So there are articles that are going to get you started, articles that will answer specific questions. So we have lots of specific answers to specific questions because they pop up all the time. So we figured, hey, we'll just build an article around it. So I would encourage them to start there with some of the just basic knowledge that's on the site. And if you're going to just get started, I mean, my questions are, so when people ask what printer to buy, we have a series, maybe 3 to 4 questions, and it's a little bit like going to the doctor. I have to diagnose what your need is before I can start throwing out machines. So some questions would be, how big? Well, first of all, what's your budget? Second is, how big? Was it 8.5, 13, 17, bigger? The third thing is, do you really care if it on display is good for 70, 80, 90, or 100 years? Or is it cool that on display it might be 30, 40, and 50 years? So that triggers dye versus pigment. And then the last question is, how important is black and white to you? So if somebody says to me, black and white's my life, that's all I care about, then we'd direct them to the printers that have the superior black and white systems on board. Now that could change. This Canon Pro 300 is a new generation, and it could be that they've raised their game up to meet Epson's black and white, but I haven't tested it yet. So the person asking the question, the first part is what paper, to try. I would recommend that you get a sample kit and just stare at the paper for a while, touch it and feel it, and see if any of them emotionally ring with you. And then if others make you kind of scowl, set those aside, and then try those out following the instructions that come in the kit or, on the web. And then for your first box of paper to do test printing with, I would always recommend satin or luster, because it's the most forgiving, it's the biggest dynamic range, and it's the surface that is friendly to just about every genre. So if you're shooting aviation, it looks fine. Shooting flowers, it looks fine. Shooting, families, it looks fine. There's nothing I can pick to print that will look bad on satin paper. Now, are there papers that might be better? Sure, but satin is going to be your test bed so that you learn settings and you learn how to optimize your photographs and, editing for print. It's just the easiest way so that you don't get lost in the details of, oh goodness, do I like matte? What should I do? Get your feet wet first, and then you can start diving into what's the best paper for X.
Great. And Linda's asking, what matte paper gives the richest blacks?
So in our world, in our product line, the highest performance matte paper is our Polar Matte, and we offer it in a C1S single-sided 60-pound or 230 gram of a double-sided 230 gram, and then we take that product and we laminate it and make it into a 330 gram version called 88-pound Polar Matte. So for matte papers, it definitely has the best Dmax for basically any printer that she might have. Other matte papers tend to be like cotton. So there'll be like Palladuro or Aurora, which is made of cotton and is also matte. Any cotton paper will almost always have a slightly lower color gamut or dynamic range than the bright white tree-based matte papers.
And she's saying it's being on an Epson 7890.
Okay. Well, I guess the question is it, you know, what's she going to do with it? If she's okay with a 230 gram 10 mil matte paper, then that polar matte would be the absolute best. And if she's looking for something maybe past that into the fine art range, then from our line, it would be Palladuro Smooth Rag, because it is the best cotton-based museum grade paper, and it has, in our line at least, the best dynamic range.
So she says a heavy warm paper for fine art.
That's it. So Linda, I would look at either Palladuro Smooth Rag, or I would look at our Aurora line. So Aurora is we have it, it's our product where we have it made for us in the United States. So it's a fully USA based 100% cotton paper. So check out Aurora, check out Palladuro Smooth Rag, and they're both in the fine art section of our website.
And that's the website is redrivercatalog.com.
Yes.
Okay, and I put that into the chat. So maybe you could talk a little bit about weight and GSM and what those things mean.
Sure. So the specs, you know, I do a talk to camera clubs mostly, and done a few here and there for just various groups. And one part of the slide deck is specs. So specs are important because so much of shopping is done online. So that's why, of course, again, be a parrot here and repeat over and over again that sample kits are super important. And I don't care where you're buying your paper, you know, buy sample kits first before you start buying, you know, 50 and 60 and $100 boxes of paper. So specs are important so you can make a mental image of the paper before you place an order. So the two that are sort of the most used are thickness and weight. Thickness is easy. It's designated as a mil or MIL, and that is 1,000th of an inch. And there's benchmarks that if you can remember these benchmarks, then the paper will kind of start to create an image in your mind. 5 mil paper is typical copy paper. 10 mil paper is photo paper from like a C print from a lab. 15 mil paper is you know, the medium weight cotton arts, and then 20 or 21 mil paper is the heavy, beefy fine art papers. And some Epsons can use board, which is up to 35 or 50 millimeter, which is like 1 to 1.5 millimeters. So don't get millimeters and mils confused. They are, they can be converted, but they're not the same. Of course, one's going to be metric, and the other is 1,000th of an inch.
Okay.
So weight is, I can do weight real fast. Grams per square meter is what everybody should think about and should care about, because pound weight, it can be confusing. So grams per square meter, again, has benchmarks. 100 gram is copy paper. 230 to 260 gram is photo paper like C print. 300 and up is considered sort of a weighty, fine arty, fine photographic paper. The pound weights are confusing because there are 5 scales that we use in the paper industry to weigh paper that date back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And the one that we use, because it's the correct one, as my old boss would say, is bond basis. So everybody knows what 20-pound bond paper feels like because it's copy paper. So 20 pound is bond, 60, 70 pound is photo, 80 to 100 pound is fine art or fine photography. But then people like HP swoop in and use a different measurement. So they're selling paper they call 120 pound, which is actually in our world only 60 pound. So it really, I mean, I hate to pick on them because they're the easiest ones. They're the ones I remember being the biggest offenders to that. So if you just shove aside all of the pound weight and stick with grams, then you'll be fine. And we put all this information on in every box, on every web page. And we also have a scale so you can kind of see where it lies from copy up to sort of heavy art paper.
So some printers have a direct flat feed, some do not. What's kind of the heaviest paper you can use in a transport that goes around the rollers.
Okay, so that's a front feed. You I'm thinking HP. Is that what you're thinking?
I've got a Canon. My office printer is like a MG 7520,
Mhm.
and then I have a Pro 10.
Okay, so the MG, for example, some of those Canon printers and Epson printers and HP printers only feed from a front cassette that you pull out, put the paper in. So if you're lucky, the heaviest and thickest paper would be about a 10 mil, 10.5 mil, up to about 230 gram for matte paper and about 260 gram for RC paper. And again, it depends on humidity, how old the printer is, what direction the wind is blowing. And then for printers that have a rear top feed, that's going to be anywhere from your low end of 5 mil up to, I could successfully cram a 21 mil paper through the top of that Canon printer without using the single path in the back.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to, but you could, in theory, do it. So for the top ones only, so no specialty feed at all, I typically would recommend we stop at about 15 where you get into trouble. You could do something, something.
So also coming in chat from Greg Page, great information. Following up on the question regarding printers, say I'm happy with prints that will live for fewer years, mixed size, 11 by 14, maximum size rather. With the option of good black and white, where would you start looking at printers in the current crop of availables?
Okay, so now we're in kind of a weird flux. There's two things at play. There are, I'm sorry to be long-winded, but sometimes
It's okay.
Right now, two things have come together to make it weird for us in this industry. The first is COVID and the disruptions that it causes in supply chains. And then the second is that Epson and Canon are rolling over models because their current models are getting sort of just too old for the engineers to sit still. They have to make something new. So Canon, I would answer him that on a normal day, I'd say the Canon Pro 100 because it is just this great workhorse of speed and reliability and paper feed mechanisms. And if you can find one for $400, buy it because you'll be happy. The black and white is good, not amazing, because it wasn't designed with black and white specifically in mind. But from what he said, I think it would take him quite a long way. But if you can't find them, two things have to happen. Either you have to upgrade to the next level, so to speak, which would be the pigment-based 13-inch wide printers. From Epson, it's the P700. From Canon, it's this Pro 300. And those two are going to be your state-of-the-art for all printing. But the downside is they're like $700 to $900. From Epson, there's a printer called the XP15000. Very unwieldy name, but if he wanted to get into printing for under the $400 range, it's a 6-color dye-based printer. It's got a wonderful color gamut. Black and white will be pretty darn good, and it would take you quite a long way.
Cool. So let's go a little different area, pigment versus dye inks on printers that 4 ink, 5 ink, 6 ink, 9 ink. What are some of the differences people should be looking at there?
Sure. So back in the old days, dye versus pigment was really important because pigment, let's see, it was like 2000, I want to say 2001 or 2, Epson brought out this machine called the 2000P, which was their first real attempt at pigment-based inkjet printing. And it was not good. And if you ever got an Epson engineer and said, hey, this is not very good, they'd grab you by the shirt sleeves and shake you and say, well, look, you people asked for this. It's bleeding edge technology. So, but it was groundbreaking though, because all of a sudden, you and I had access to this little thing that would print photos that would last 100 years here at home. So it was the first of why pigment became important, because the difference essentially is that pigments are flecks of color suspended in a medium, so they're heterogeneous. And dye is a colorant that's been, what am I trying to say? It's been dissolved in a medium, so it's homogeneous. So dyes are inherently less fade resistant, and they're more prone to damage from UV radiation. Pigments, on the other hand, are always going to be the color. Think about a cave painting in France that's been there for 10,000 years. That's pigments. So we have these two types of inks, and for the crowd here today listening, the chances are that pigment is really the only thing that you're interested in, because you're pretty much assured that a print on a pigment printer, when it's taken care of properly, has a floor of about 50 years before significant fade kicks in, and then a ceiling is unknown because nobody can really actually predict how long these things are going to last. So that's the reason dye and pigment exist. And then somebody asked me last week, well, why does dye even exist now? What's the point? And the answer, I believe, is one is corporate, that printer companies feel like they have to have lots of options. And if you notice, like Canon's line, they've got like 32 different inkjet printers, and Epson probably has 20 or 30 different printers in all categories, maybe more than that. So I think they offer them because they can sell that ink for roughly the same as pigment to the consumer. They're making more money because it costs less to make, and it is just easier to handle in terms of color management and incompatibility with cheap paper. So that's kind of why I believe dye still exists. So pigment, though, is what we would people who are serious would start at that level if, for example, you said to yourself, I'm going to sell this, first of all. And secondly, if you really just feel in your heart that it needs to be still a valid, good-looking image in 100 years.
Mm-hmm. So along with inks, are there archival qualities to papers, or is it mostly the inks that we're worried about?
So there's two things. That's a great question. There's two things going on. We have to separate out fade from paper's archivability. So I'll use that in quotes because it's not really a good term to use. So how long ink will fade is mostly related to the ink itself. And that variable changes depending on the class of media that you put it on. And I can break it down pretty quickly. RC papers, like satins, lusters, glosses, they have the fastest onset of fade. So we're looking at a floor of about 50 years, maybe up into the 60s and 70s. Then there are tree-based matte papers and cotton fine art papers. And the fade on those two is fairly similar, with a floor of about 80 and an upper limit which is unknown. So that's important as a first thing when I'm picking paper. Do I care if it's 50, or do I care if it's 100, or do I just want it to look pretty and I find a product I like? And then the second component is the archivability of the paper. So how long will this paper withstand the rigors of wherever it's hung, wherever it's put, and the ravages of time? So paper can be archival in a few different ways, but the important stuff is acid content, optical brightener content, and what it's made of. So at Red River Paper, I sort of designated 3 different kinds of paper. And I did so because I wanted to set the definitions from scratch so that we would stand behind what we define the paper as. So there's photo grade, archival grade, and museum grade. Photo grade is RC paper and glossy and satin papers. And those have, they have plastics in them, and they have a little bit of acid in the coating because they have to for technical reasons. The next is archival grade. They can be made of trees, they can be made of cotton, and they don't have any plastics in them, and they might have optical brighteners in them. And then the third grade is museum grade. They have to be made of cotton. They cannot have optical brighteners in them, because that's the class of media that an archivist or somebody who runs a museum would not wince at if they were handed a print. If somebody says, I have a pigment-based inkjet print on cotton media with no optical brighteners, the person from the museum goes, that's great, puts it aside. Because that fulfills those 2 variables I was talking about. It fulfills the slowest fade of the ink, and also the longest amount of time before that paper starts to physically break down. And then optical brighteners are, I haven't talked about those, but real quick, That's either an optical brightener or what's called a fluorescing brightener. And that's chemicals that are put into paper, usually in the coating, not in the base. And all they do is make them look brighter white, or bluer white is actually technically what's happening. So an FBA gives off blue light when it's excited by UV light, so sunlight, or the light above me. And the optical brighteners are going to just be white by definition. Titanium dioxide is an example. And as a fun aside, that's in Twinkie filling. So you have consumed the titanium dioxide, and it's also what's in Tide that makes your clothes look so bright, is they fill it with optical brighteners, which is sort of the way that it makes it look cleaner than it really is. So those chemicals have a gas tank, so to speak, a gas tank. And as they're hit by UV radiation, they use up that gas tank to the point where they no longer do their job. And that's when paper shows its true color. So if you ever look at a portrait on the wall of my grandfather in 1945 in Burma, it's yellow in all of the areas around where the paper was white. And that's because the OBAs have all quit and the original tone of the paper pops through.
Cool. So how do we compare inkjet printing to C prints in life?
In life, so C prints kind of fall into two categories these days, I think, and I'm certainly not super expert at that tech, but you can either get a C print that has a fairly decent life, so maybe 20 to 30 years, and then other C prints like on Fuji Crystal Archive or Kodak Endura come to mind. They're supposed to be rated in the 70 to 100 year range. Inkjet printing is, because the colorants that are used in pigmented ink, in theory, we can almost always exceed a C print in terms of fade resistance.
Okay.
We can almost match a C print in terms of what we would call smooth tone or continuous tone. I think if you had a really high quality file set to a high level on one of these new Epsons or Canons, there's no evident dots, right? And so that matches the C print. So for all intents and purposes, I think the technologies are at least equal, and maybe Inkjet can surpass that to some degree.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Be nice to me, Michael.
I'm always nice. The man is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Iris prints, dye transfers, and inkjet. Longevity.
Okay, you're pulling me a little bit out of my depth, but Iris is there, so there aren't any more Irises, right? I mean, Iris was the first commercial inkjet machine that came out in the 90s, right? And I don't even know. I mean, you'd have to hunt and see if you could find an Iris print that's still hanging somewhere. Maybe it is. So what I think I would do is just change that language over to being a digital press. So it's kind of like an Iris, but they're just a little bit different tech, like an HP Indigo. A lot of what you see printed these days is from an Indigo press.
Sort of the on-demand books.
Yeah, exactly. On-demand books are run and owned by Indigo, and other companies like Kodak Next Press and the Fuji has one, and they're just always playing catch up with HP because HP dominates the heck out of that industry. So those are going to have what I would consider to be fade resistance that's about like offset printing. So there is not really going to be a big number attached to it, and it's not something where you would hunt out or seek out that tech unless there was a real good reason in terms of volume or something weird about where it's going to be displayed. And then dye sublimation, I think, Michael, is what you're talking about. And that's like coffee cups, for example, or dye sub onto metal. Those are not super fade resistant because they are, well, the coffee cup is because it's on ceramic, but the metal prints aren't super archival because it's a dye colorant. And over time, I just talked to a customer yesterday who was reprinting somebody's home in Los Angeles because all of their metal prints had started to sort of go south on them after 5 or 6 years.
Really?
Yeah, now who knows where they're displayed, right? LA is, I mean, pardon my language, LA's got filthy air. LA has a continuously changing environment. So some days it's really humid. Most of the time it's very dry. And it could be facing the sun. Who knows why they actually faded? Because a lot of it is user error, right? I mean, if somebody says my inkjet print faded in 6 months, there's a really good chance it's in a bathroom, in a kitchen, facing somewhere it shouldn't be. So if you treat these things right, they're pretty much all going to last, you know, kind of a decent, probably outlast us. Let's put it that way.
But what about dye transfers?
Well, dye transfer, I don't think the materials are available anymore.
Oh yeah, Michael, you're out of my range. Those were something I wouldn't have had any.
You mean I
The
got to lose my.
matrix is,
Okay, all right. But
Yeah,
there are dye transfer prints that people have purchased. I mean, I have some dye transfer prints from P. Turner.
mhm. No, those I expect to be archival and last, but I just don't think the matrix materials for dye transfers are available anymore. Katine.
I mean, you mean to make
color-
new,
to make
new
new
dye
ones.
transfers?
Right.
No, okay, okay. And then what happened? What's the longevity between inkjet and something from my past?
Well,
That's
I mean,
that's sort of what we're talking about.
Like gum by Krovic.
yeah, it's kind of like, I think, John, you're going to launch into it. It's kind of like what we feel and they feel. Let's just say the engineers at Epson and Canon feel like that they can, under the right circumstances, match up with a darkroom print from 1966. And but again, it has everything in the world to do with where it's stored, how it's stored, temperature, humidity.
Okay.
So if you ever walk into the archives of a museum, you will notice the place is very different than your living room, right? There's an intent behind that. So I think that the short answer, pardon me, is that in the right circumstances, pigment-based inkjet prints can match up with that older technology.
Do you want to talk about real canvas?
Can I add something, if you don't mind, for a second? When
Yeah,
you're talking
Kevin.
about, if you would like, one place that you can get all sorts of information on archivability of inkjet prints and regular prints, C prints, and all the things that you're just asking about, is from Wilhelm Imaging Research. Henry Wilhelm. Some of us have been in the industry a long time, know Henry, and you can go to its wilhelm-research.com and take a look at all his articles in regards to accelerated aging of prints under different lighting conditions and humidity conditions and so forth. Also, just kind of as my own little plug, you know, we do a lot of paper reviews on PhotoPXL. We have done numerous ones. We have a very good reviewer for that, Mark Siegel. They're very technical and so forth, and you can learn a lot just going to PhotoPXL and, you know, going to paper reviews or put in a specific type of paper you're interested in.
Yeah, do you want to put Henry's and your links in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, I'm copying the link now to do that for
Okay,
you, but I
great.
just didn't want to interfere too much with the thing, so I thought I'd just interject. You know me, I got lots to offer there and so forth.
Yes.
So take a look at that if you get a chance. We do a lot of stuff in regards to printing on the website, and probably within the next 4 days, I'll have a review of the new Epson P700 up on the site, which is a great printer to start with. So keep your eyes out for that. And Epson's put out a really cool piece of software there that you can use, Epson Print Layout, and then you combine it with these papers and away you go. The Plantine papers also, they're one of my favorites, so it's also a very good one to work with. So Drew, you've done a great job so far, so you know, I've kept quiet, but you know, printing is my forte. It's been what I've done all my life, pretty much.
Because of that, I like you because of that, because it's you know, not to get too emotional about it, but it's seriously the best way to share and to preserve our history. Digital preservation of history will end up biting us on the butt, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll put a link into an article I wrote about that one thing. You know, what are we going to do when all the pictures on our iPhones? You know, we're not making prints anymore, so I'll send that article. I'll put Wilhelm's link into the into the chat for you guys.
I've invited Peter Crow to join us in one of these. I haven't had a response yet, so if any of you know Peter and want to
And I know
Goose
Peter
him a
pretty
bit.
well.
Goose
He's
him a bit to come on and do a show. That'd be
great on
great.
digital asset management and so forth. So good. Let me put these links in. I don't want to talk too long because it's not my thing. But Drew, great presentation.
Sure. Thank you.
So printer drivers and sharpening, where are we these days with those? Are there special drivers? Let the printer control color, let the Photoshop control color. Do you have any feelings or
Sure.
guidance there?
Yeah. How many hours do you have? So I'll try and riff on not riff. I'll free form this and make it as short as possible. The short answer is for the most control, most consistency, highest accuracy, you should use a printer profile that is built for the printer, the paper, and the ink that you're currently using. So Red River's profile library is the largest free profile library on earth. We're at like 1,300 profiles. We've been profiling since '03. I had to fight my boss tooth and nail back then to do it because he thought it was a bunch of voodoo and crazy talk. And I'm like, I think it's probably pretty important. So we hunted down somebody to help us out. And over the years, we've made our own. But for the most part, our profiles are made by Chromix, which is a color management company in Seattle.
Mhm.
And they are the best in terms of the best, right? They profile $1 million presses and they profile for people who are printing all over the world. So we let them do the most important profiles for us. So in terms of accuracy, consistency, and just saving money overall, so you don't have to reprint things, use a printer profile. If you're going to buy a system to make your own profiles, you know, the X-Rite system is the one, probably has the best spectrophotometer that normal humans can buy. It's not thousands and thousands of dollars. When you do that, when you designate when you want the printer profile to be in charge, the process is, you know, your editing software is told you're managing color, here's the profile to use, and then the printer driver is told to step aside and the software is going to be doing the work. With a Windows computer, you have to actually click buttons to make that happen. Ideally, in the Mac environment, if everything is going well, it will automatically shut off the driver for you so that only Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever is in charge. So that's kind of my spiel about color management, is that profiles is the best way.
Mhm.
Sharpening is a little bit different. You know, Lightroom has in the print module, there's a sharpening algorithm of sorts. And
Right.
very typically of that sort of system, it's vague. So
Mhm.
all you know is that we have an algorithm for sharpening things that are glossy, which what they meant to say is things with a reflection. And then things that don't have a reflection is the other algorithm. And then you can either up and down it.
Right. At 3 levels.
Yeah, and that has everything in the world to do with distance that you're going to see a print, right? An image that is it's going to be viewed. It's a large image is going to be viewed from 20 feet away. Is going to be so sharp that when you walk up on top of it, it's not going to look so great.
Crunchy.
And that's on purpose, right?
Mhm.
And then a 4x6 doesn't need to be sharp because you're sitting right on top of it. But a long time ago, I had he lived in Dallas. He was a wedding photographer, and really, really technically brilliant. Charged more money than 2 of my weddings would have cost now I mean the entire wedding, by the way,
Yeah.
for his services, right? But he told me a long time ago that his trick was, for sharpening at least, is to, in Photoshop, and this is a long time ago, so we were talking about unsharp masks still.
Mhm.
So you take unsharp mask and this is for printing specifically. You go up in unsharp mask until you go, ooh, that's disgusting, and back down about 10%. And ever since he told me that, everything looks just better to me. Now, we're not talking about distances. We're just talking about generally speaking. And it's because, and we have a concept we call editing for print, and it's got 3 legs to it. And the reason is that, you know, in our technology, from capture to print is a downhill slope. So capture is, of course, the highest of everything, highest dynamic range, highest gamut, everything, all the technical specs. And down at the bottom, down by the river living in a van, is the printer. And it's never going to change, right? I don't care how many iterations of machines Epson and Canon come out with. The truth is they've plateaued. They plateaued years ago, and they just dink around the edges. So this new Epson is really nice, and it has about a 4% difference in black gamut. Great. But most human beings cannot discern that differential. So my point is, when you're taking an image for print, you have to help it. You have to do things that you normally wouldn't do so that you get a really good output without having to do many iterations. And so the three legs are sharpness, which we talked about, exposure, which is most images are underexposed for the purposes of printing. I don't care how long you've been shooting. I don't care what you shoot, where you shoot, period. Most everything is underexposed unless you blatantly overexpose it. So the trick is I add 1/3 of a stop to 2/3 of a stop to everything that I print. And this is just—
Do you think things are underexposed because people's monitors are too bright?
That's definitely part of it. So it's definitely part of it is that the monitors are too bright and we can't convince enough people to stop and properly calibrate, right? Or if they do, maybe they're calibrating on this little piece of garbage monitor I have on my left here, which is like I don't know what it is, but it's calibratable, but it's not really going to work right?
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other thing is, and this is my opinion, is that digital cameras tend to underexpose on a regular basis. And what I mean is I can have my exposure set right, and I can have everything looks right, everything on the histogram looks right, but for whatever reason, it just seems too dark. So, I mean, I shoot a D4 and I always have a +3, plus 0.3 on my exposure so that I'm saving myself some trouble. That may be just me, but I believe that translates over to the image. So we tell people to add 1/3 of a stop or 2/3 of a stop as the last step before you print. I think that helps. And then the third thing is a trick that I learned from, this is one of the things with ADD is I can't recall things that I need to really rapidly. I'll remember his name in a minute. Mid-tone contrast. And it's, for us nerds, it's just simply putting a small S curve on the curves. And it's going to deepen the middle tones a little bit and put some contrast in there. And when that's done and printed, the print will look poppier and it will look more, I guess, more saturated and bold than it really is. And so those are, everybody knows these, right? I'm not revealing anything secret here, but when you put the three together, print quality tends to go up, and we tend to not hear back from customers who initially had a problem.
Yeah. How do you boast that mid-tone contrast?
In Lightroom, I've when I get lazy, I just choose. I'd have to call Lightroom up real quick. Let me fire it up on my Windows. It is a drop down, and I believe it's just medium. For me, that's a quick and easy, especially if I'm teaching somebody who doesn't have that as part of what they're used to. For a lot of people don't know what tone curves are. So Lightroom has a point curve called medium contrast. Yeah. And it just puts a real gentle S into the curve.
Because I sometimes do that in Photoshop using unsharp mask with a low amount and a high radius, like 16 amount and 83 or 85 radius and 0 threshold. And that just gives this pop. And I think I got that from one of the Knoll brothers back when I worked at Adobe.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's cool. So, and then in Photoshop, you could do that. Or if you go to just, Control L or Command L, it brings up the levels, and you can just, not levels, I'm sorry. It's the curve. And just give it a slight, on the third, halfway past half point, move up, halfway to the other side of half point, move down, and you can see it in action. So that's just for me. I think it makes a difference enough to say over and over again.
Great. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Do we have more questions from the audience, or comments, or
something just curious, not probably very practical otherwise? Are all the heavier papers, the 325s, a laminate paper?
No, definitely not. The papers that we laminate are 88-pound polar mat, 96-pound Pecos gloss, and 86-pound Pecos gloss double-sided. That's because there's nobody on earth, no paper mill that would create a product like that. So we're forced to do that on our own. Those papers tend to find their way into graphic arts and graphic design more than photography per se. So, and the lamination is archival as well. The glue is acid free, but most heavy papers like the cottons and the Barytas are a single sheet of paper.
Cool.
And Palo Duro is wonderful. Drew, do you think that digital photography is more like color negative or transparency film?
Michael, why are you gonna make me look dumb?
Why?
I'm not old enough to know that stuff. I'm kidding.
Oh God! Because in the analog days, if you had to make a mistake using color negative film, you overexposed, which would increase the density on the negative.
Yeah.
If you had to make a mistake in transparency film, you underexposed
Right,
to
so
make,
you didn't get the
make
clear
the colors
film.
richer.
Okay. Yeah, I think for Inkjet, it's thankfully it's a one-way street. There's just the one variable is that for whatever reason, underexposure or monitor being too bright and not being corrected, that we're almost always dark is the set. And that's why Lightroom has that print module correction, because they were answering the #1 complaint that people had about printing. It wasn't my colors are off, and it wasn't the paper's no good or whatever. It was my prints are too dark. So they threw that in there as, oddly enough, they were listening. And that's, that's not, I mean, they're very, very good at what they do, but a lot of times they'll add things, subtract things, hide things. And we're like, what the heck happened? Like, why in goodness gracious name is it doing that now? But that slider in Lightroom is there because, for the most part, we're too dark.
Yeah, so Janet in the comments here said she wanted to comment, if anyone is interested, Red River's Polar Pearl Metallic is really lovely for certain subjects. She had an exhibition a few months ago with 20 prints on that paper. Subject matter was metal and glass, and they were super well received. The prints just seemed to glow.
Nice, very good. Yeah, that's a neat paper. It's now called Polar Gloss Metallic because we have a luster version of it, and its job is to mimic Kodak Endura Metallic. Kodak Endura was brought out, I think maybe mid-90s, and it was just a sort of, a game changer for the C-print world. It was back then, it was a lot of people started using it. And then the Inkjet equivalent was developed, and back in '06, the big paper mill that we are associated with in Japan asked, what new products would we like, and I had a Kodak Endura print on the wall, probably tacked up or something, and I pulled it down and I said, make this, and they ran off and took 4 years. But in 2010, we introduced that product, called it Polar Pearl Metallic. It's pretty neat. It's got the trick that it employs is it's RC glossy paper, but there is a subcoat below the Inkjet receptive layer that is nano ground mica. And then that is turned into a solution or a slurry and then coated on top of the base. And that's extraordinarily difficult to do. And it took them a long time to figure it out. But if you ever get a piece of mica on the ground or wherever mica comes from, you can, if you hold it at different angles, you'll see that it's kind of a rainbow type multicolored reflections. That is, if you get really close to the gloss metallic, you can see that, and that's that trick, and it's really neat stuff.
Neat.
You want to talk about canvas?
Okay, yeah, we can briefly talk about that if we have enough time, John.
Sure, we can go on a little while.
Okay, so the canvases, we're talking about woven canvas.
Yes.
And woven canvas is, there's different versions of it, but for the most part, you'll run into canvas that's a blend. It's 65% cotton, 35% polyester. And there's either what's called a 1/1 or a 2/1 weave. And that just refers to how the loom is made. So putting the 2/1 looks nicer, it looks more, I guess, professional. Comes in lots of different weights, and that has everything in the world to do with the material being used. Usually 350 gram is the floor, up to 400 or 500 gram and that really doesn't matter because they're all about the same thickness. They're all about 18 to 20 mil thick. They come in matte, satins, and glosses. The trick is, oh, and then there are two other kinds. There's polyester only canvas, and there's 100% cotton canvas. We don't use 100% cotton canvas because it will invariably sag after it's been stretched. And that's, cotton canvases are used normally, I think, for more artistic stuff where they're flattened onto a board, and it doesn't matter if they sag or not. So in Inkjet land, we either use all poly if we're going cheap and easy for hotels and stuff like that, or we do, everybody here in the chat today would use the cotton poly blend. And if you're using a matte canvas, you have to coat it before it's been stretched. And the coating can either be matte, semi-gloss, or glossy. And
Why do you have to coat it? Why do you have to coat it?
So there's two reasons. When the canvas is stretched, the fibers pull, and when the fibers pull, they pull the ink with it, and that's not necessarily a big problem, but over time, it could be that those ink flakes start to fall off. So when we coat, we are locking everything into one layer that can be actually moved a little bit. So it needs to be coated, and coating is not hard, it's just time consuming, and this is not spray coat. You canvas coat with a roller, usually a rubber roll, no, I'm sorry, not a rubber roller, a foam roller works just fine. And the cool part about matte canvas is I recommend only buying matte canvas for most people because you can coat it matte or semi-gloss or gloss. You choose what you want it to be. People who sell, and we have a satin canvas and gloss canvas, all those they're marketed as not needing to be coated. And that's fine, I think, but the chances are, I would not take the chance of not coating it because as it, you're gonna wrap it around a 90-degree angle, and my experience is that you're probably going to start seeing cracking and whiteness around the edges. So I just go matte canvas and coat it whatever I want it to look like. And that's it. It's pretty easy to use.
Years ago, I'm going back decades ago, there used to be a material, a liquid material that you could coat paper prints, and when it dried, it crackled like a
Sort of a decoupage type of thing, or?
I don't know what it was, but I know that it crinkled like a canvas print in a museum. He's shaking his head, so we're back onto the same age wavelength.
Can
you do that?
So we, in our, this was a long time ago, but I remember being at a printing company, offset printing company, and this is probably in '99 maybe, and they had a machine that they would run prints through, and it was like a roller coating, and when they put it through and let it sit aside, it started to crack, and it was done on purpose, just like you said. But I haven't seen one of those machines in forever. I'm not even sure it's a thing anymore.
Well, I still have some containers of that stuff.
Don't drink.
Photographers are savers.
Bueller got his stuff from Gutenberg personally.
Or from Fred Spira.
Well, it's
Or
funny.
Spira
I have a signed Bible from him. Anyway, even though I'm Jewish, the issue now is I've tried making some of the wonderful canvas prints from Red River, and I have them. Haven't stretched them yet, but what happens if I coat them with this stuff?
I have no idea, especially because it's probably past its due date, so to speak. I would just go ahead and buy another jar of the Premier or the Moab or the Breathing Color canvas coating materials that are readily available and not very expensive.
Yeah,
oh, and they will crack?
No, because that would kind of interfere with the canvas's texture in my mind.
I think you're looking for the crackle finish.
Yes.
So Linda's saying Golden makes a crackle medium gel that might do it for you.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay.
One more here from Jim, who's saying he's used metallic papers for waterfalls, but he hasn't used canvas yet. Or you have suggestions on the canvas?
It's for a waterfall. I kind of see the point of metallics works really well for that. Any sort of reflective properties of the image, water especially, real quick in aviation, architecture, things like that work well for metallics. And so if he's used to that pop, I would recommend, again, a matte canvas and then coat it with the gloss coating. There are 3 coating levels, and you know, we sell the Premier, which is based in California. It's good. It's been around for a really long time. And I think that would give you what would look like the best dynamic range that you're used to if you've been happy with metallics.
I wasn't thinking of canvas for waterfalls in particular, just in general.
Okay.
I've got some matte papers that I really like them for a softer image.
Yeah.
And I got a canvas pack from someone else. I just haven't gotten around to using it yet. And clearly we have people here who like canvas prints. I thought while we're here, just if anyone has suggestions on, like, I didn't know about coating them before they crack. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, open it up. If anybody, I'd love to hear other people's, if anybody else here has done canvas printing. I mean, I think you're right. It's more of a subtle artistic effect because it forces that, right? The texture and just the general look of it. I mean, I've got a couple of wrap canvases here that I've made. It's usually portraits because my wife has asked for that look. And then I've got, I did a landscape up at Mount St. Helens that I just loved. And so I put that on canvas and made it kind of a weird size. And you can buy, you buy the stretcher bars and you can make those whatever you want. So it was kind of fun.
Cool.
So-
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Linda is saying you may try painting the crackle medium on the paper or canvas before printing, but it might need a coating with digital ground. So.
Yeah, but what happens when you send it through the printer?
You
don't
can do it
know.
after.
Huh?
You code after the print.
You're saying coat after
Yeah.
the print.
Yeah, you
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Douglas is asking us to go a little off topic here and tell us more about the drone you had up before.
do. Sure.
And that'll lead us into our next conversation with Ian and some
Okay.
airplane stuff. So,
So can y'all see that? This is a 5-inch quadcopter, and it's got a front camera. That's what we use for the first person view. So I'll put goggles on and it's recording and transmitting through the video transmitter so I can fly it. And then we 3D print a GoPro mount. I have a really old GoPro. So it sits on the front and we just hit it and go fly around and try not to run into too much. There's another one here. I only have 2 of the bigger ones, and I built this one. I bought this one mostly done, and if you break it, they do look complicated, and that's because they are. There's a lot of technology here that would have cost $100,000 15 years ago. I mean, this particular one is set up that I could fly it. I think this is a 5 kilometer. So, and I wouldn't do that in a populated area because it's just asking for it, but you could do this 5 kilometers away and get a good video picture and control the darn thing. And it's just fun, and putting them together, you can buy them ready to go. And piloting skill is different. So I'm an RC airplane person, have been since like 87. So I was ingrained into my head, but I did helicopters too for a few years before I ran out of money. And this works out really well. So I would encourage, if anybody here is even thinking about a little bit of aerial photography, just grab, whatever you can afford, or just build one. And I mean, this is not really designed for cinematic stuff, right? Because, the problem is, if you can see that, the GoPro is at an angle. And that's because to fly straight and level, I have to be like this. So now the GoPro is straight, but this is forward flight. So if you want it to be straight on, you'd have to change the GoPro mount and then just sit. But because they have the technology in these things is crazy. If you tell it, especially if I put a GPS puck on it, if I say stay in this position, it will hold its position over the earth within about a foot. And that's on a windy day. And I have a camera ship here. I can't show you because it's in a box, but it's actually a big, made by a company called Unique, and it's a 4K camera ship, and it's designed just to shoot cinematics. It'll do following and stuff like that. And it's old, but it still works. Yeah, sorry, I'm nerding out. I just love it.
That's okay. I'm just going back for the printing one more time, though. Linda says the digital ground is to coat before you, so you can put the stuff on the canvas of the printing or the paper before you print.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Interesting.
If you put the coating on the canvas before you print, what then happens to the printer as it goes through and comes out to the heads?
Yeah, my impression is that it would not work out well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing that.
Once. It would happen. It would be good once.
Yeah, exactly. You can do it once.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. And I think this has been really informative. I've learned quite a bit from this today. Thank you all for coming and joining us. We'll make a recording of this available later today.
Drew is brilliant. That's why I love Drew, and I absolutely love Red River paper. No doubt about it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
No, John, thank you for the invitation. It's
Sure.
been fun. It's not my normal wheelhouse. I think it will be more as we go forward with these kinds of meetings, but I do enjoy it. I can relax and start talking about what I know a lot about.
Great.
And we can talk about, so I was joking with Michael, it was like, as long as we stay on papers, I sound great. If you start asking about other things, I don't know what to tell you.
I'm
So
really
Monday, yeah, Ian's going to be my guest Monday. So Ian, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about?
I can hardly wait to find out myself.
That sounds like a Jay Maisel quote.
I'm going to try to touch on some of the bigger, more important aspects of what I've done. I've been really just a working photographer. You know, I don't have the big gallery displays of the books and on and on and on. But especially in the bodybuilding and fitness business, if you ever picked up a magazine in the last 20 years, no matter where around the globe you saw my photos. You know, if you went to a bodybuilding or fitness show and saw the banners on the side of the building, that was me. If you ever looked at an ad from a supplement company, that was me. So I'm going to touch on some of that. Probably going to touch on a motion picture I shot on back in 2013 in Budapest with some of my favorite stars. And then move on to my aviation work because I'm the photographer and the aviation coordinator out at the Palm Springs Air Museum. So I get to fly in a lot of those and have flown
Great.
In a lot of those airplanes.
Great. Well, we're really looking forward to that. So join us here on Monday, the 31st, 10 Pacific, 1 Eastern, and you can figure out the other time zones from there, I hope. So thank you all. It's been great.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Nice to meet everybody.
Thanks, Drew. Take care.
Sure.
Bye.